This presentation about agroforestry was created by my former students, so I wanted to give them credit. Wagner, Hartman, and Kaufman, thank you for your hard work on this presentation. So forestry is the profession that embraces the science, art, and practice of creating, managing, using, and conserving forests and associated resources for human benefit and in a sustainable manner to meet desired goals, needs, and values. And this definition comes from the Society of American Foresters per 2008. So here you can see a functional forest system in Austria on the left, and on the right you can see a beech forest in Slovenia. So a lot of times we tend to think of only the forests in our own spaces, but of course the world has many diverse and amazing forests, and what is sustainable for each of them is going to be based on its individual ecosystem. But in general, when it comes to forestry, selective cutting and floor management is what ultimately ends up being the most sustainable across the board. So, of course, forestry has ancient origins, as with pretty much everything we talk about in agriculture, but in the 5th century, the monks established stone pine plantations on the Adriatic coast. In the 7th century, the Visigoths, which were Germanic people in the Roman Empire, developed the first formal forestry practices that focused on the conservation of oak and pine trees, which, FYI, oak trees are my favorite. In the 16th century, Japanese instituted management techniques for sustainable timber yields. In the 19th century, John Evelyn promoted tree plantations in the British Isles. And in the 20th century, we've seen a large-scale evolution of forest management and conservation practices in the United States and in Europe. Forests are arguably the most important component of the biosphere. This is because of their intrinsic self-regulating qualities and, of course, that all-important thing called oxygen that they do such a great job of producing for us. But as a part of the ecosystem, of course, they are a huge component, not only providing food and shelter and oxygen, but helping to regulate the atmosphere and about 1,000 other amazing things. But of course, they're just a huge backbone of the world, and of course very important for us to manage appropriately. One of the scary ideas is that we might lose the Amazon rainforest, which is such a large component of the Earth's ecosystem that it would have absolutely detrimental effects to life on the planet should it be lost. So history for you, a little more history. From the 1850s to the 1970s, forests were not considered as viable agriculture systems. Unemployed or landless laborers would be called upon by foresters to help take care of the land, and in turn, they were allowed to cultivate between the rows of trees to keep whatever they sowed. And agriculture products could in no way take away from the yields of the trees, or they would be removed immediately. So, this was a pretty popular practice. Agroforestry kind of was born of this, the intentional combination of agriculture and forestry to create integrated and sustainable land use systems. It takes advantage of the interactive benefits from combining trees and shrubs with crops and/or livestock. So agroforestry practices include alley cropping, forest farming, riparian forest buffers, silvopasture, windbreaks, and other special applications. And that definition is per the United States Department of Agriculture National Agroforestry Center. So we're going to go over some of these definitions, some of these practices. So alley cropping to start with. This is an annual agriculture crop that's grown with long-term trees to provide income while the trees mature, because it takes time for the trees to mature and make money. So, you grow something with them to cover that time period. You still have to have an income, right? So walnut, oak, ash, and pecan varieties work particularly well in this system. They are the common varietals used. So you can see some pictures here. They're growing corn in between trees. They're growing beans in between trees. You can grow a variety of things. Any kind of agriculture commodity you can grow in between these rows of trees. You just have to space the rows wide enough that they don't block out sunlight. if most crops that are grown require a lot of sunlight, so you just have to space the trees accordingly. But while you're waiting for them to mature, this provides a great way to not only provide floor or soil covering, we never want naked soils, right? But it also provides some income while you're waiting for those trees to mature and produce. Forest farming is a combination of high-quality trees and specialized agriculture products like specific species of mushrooms. And the mushroom business actually is quite lucrative, makes very good money for those who are doing it well. The trees provide a canopy, and this system is especially beneficial for crops which require low light conditions, so that would be mushrooms. Riparian forest buffers are natural or man-made forests which run up against water bodies such as streams or lakes to separate them from croplands or pastures. They are intended to reduce runoff and non-point source pollution and of the water body, stabilize stream banks, and increase species diversity, among other things. They're also aesthetically pleasing and just absolutely gorgeous. So they have many, many benefits. And there's actually grant programs that will cover these. We just don't see a lot of people putting them in Indiana because of the tree roots causing issues for tile systems in nearby fields. However, they can be made to work with the appropriate buffer. So highly recommend if you become a component of the USDA NRCS. NRCS stands for Natural Resource Conservation System. If you become an NRCS officer or conservation officer, I highly recommend that you suggest riparian forest buffers through the grant programs that the USDA offers, and just make sure that they pair them with another grass buffer so that we get those tile systems as far away from the riparian forest root systems, and then they are a lot more successful. All right, so windbreaks. Windbreaks are where we have linear tree plantings which protect crops and livestock. They benefit conservation of soil and water, and they increase overall production. Some types of windbreaks include livestock windbreaks, field windbreaks, living snow fences, and community shelter beds. The most windbreaks ever were actually planted after the Dust Bowl in the late 1930s and early 1940s. And a lot of those shelter belts, which is another term for them, are actually kind of expiring right now. A lot of the trees that were planted back then are past their prime and dying or withering away. You'll see a lot of them being removed right now, and so there's actually a nationwide need for replacing our windbreaks. So definitely want to push for these to be done so they don't end up back in the same issues that we had back in the Dust Bowl. So some nice little comics here for you. Windbreaks give soil a break from wind. Farmers saying yep. So of course we want to make sure that we, plant them in an area where there's prevailing wind direction. That is an issue. We want, they help provide more than 60% density for snow and wind, 40 to 60% density for wind only. We want about 75 to 100 feet from the one end of the ditch to the other. So here you can see that we have a drainage ditch that things are going to be melting into, whatever. We want to provide adequate drainage. And then our riparian windbreaks come right up to that. All right, silvopasture. This is a combination of trees with animals and pasture or hay. The trees provide shade and wind shelter as well as an alternative food source when limbs fall. So silvopasture is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorite practices, mostly because I grew up on a cattle ranch. So I just love the combination of animals and trees. That's what I grew up with. So this feels like home. It's a wonderful way to provide shelter for the animals. The animals provide fertilizer for the trees. The trees can provide another source of income for ranchers. So this is really popular actually in like the Sierra Nevadas and other mountainous regions. Rocky Mountains, etc., Appalachian Mountains. This is a great practice for any of those kinds of areas where we have a lot of dense forest that we need to clear out some of the forest floor to provide adequate sunlight for new saplings that are going to be coming up, and also helps to provide fertilizer for those upcoming saplings. So it's a great way to manage both your animals and forest land. And of course, in silver pasture type scenarios, we want to move the animals around. We don't want them to just devastate one area over and over. That's a part of the management system. So this is a great combination of trees and animals. You can also include pasture hay in there and have, even more sources of income. All right, so functions, right? We've got production, so fodder, fuel, lumber, food, industrial. All of these are functions of forest. There's also protective functions, right? They're a windbreak, they're a shelter belt. They help with soil conservation, they help with soil improvement, they help with water conservation, they help provide shade, and they help provide a place for biodiversity to thrive and do well. So we have all of these, combinations, right? We have agro-silvicultural combinations, we have silvopastoral combinations, and we have agro-silvopastoral combinations. So agro-silvicultural is where we combine trees with an agriculture commodity. Silvopastoral is where we combine trees with animals on pasture. Agro-silvopastoral is where we provide forest trees with crop and pastured animals. So just to give you a brief introduction into these different terminologies, there's also this growing money bank that we can get with agroforestry, where shiitake, ginseng, and oak trees are providing a lot of income. So ginseng is a really popular food in medicine, so see a lot of people out ginseng hunting in the woods, hopefully not on other people's property without permission. And it sells for a really high amount, and it's actually really there's a very specific way that you have to take care of the root in order for it to be viable for sale. So it requires a lot of knowledge being passed down between generations on how to collect ginseng root, to dry it and prepare it. And it sells for a lot of money per pound. I think at one point a couple of years ago, I heard that it was going for $50 a pound, and then another time it was going for $500 a pound. So for the market seems to fluctuate, but either way, it's worth a lot. Shiitake mushrooms are used for food and medicine, also worth a lot of money. Oak is used for lumber, fodder, and shade, and they're absolutely gorgeous trees. They're my favorite trees. So that it's a very high valued wood for for making furniture, for building houses. It's a beautiful wood, lots of cabinetry. People often prefer oak because of the grain patterns and for how well it withstands time. So these are really, really great ways to make money in agroforestry. Agro-silvopastoral combinations can include black walnuts, which provide lumber, nuts, and weed control. Can include pawpaw trees, which provide fruit, medicine, and pest control. Grasses, which provide fodder, soil, and moisture conservation. And you can combine all of these with goats, which provide meat, milk, and fertility. So that's a really popular system that has been seen to work very well. The North American pawpaw in agroforestry has been really popular, especially in this region, since that's where the pawpaw is native. And they're also delicious. It's kind of like a guava and a banana made a baby. And if you're ever in Christie Woods, we do get pawpaws there in early fall, late August. So check those out sometime. They're pretty tasty. Social dimensions of all this. In order to operate effectively, agroforestry must address issues in the various social dimensions of society. So in order for farmers wishing to produce agroforestry to get loans, the banks must be educated on methods and benefits of agroforestry, as this often falls outside of the commonly accepted traditional agriculture practices. And that means it makes it really hard for people to get loans for this type of agro industry because the banks are used to hearing about corn and beans. They're not used to hearing about agroforestry, so they're a lot more leery about giving loans out for these, which is why we don't see these practices very often, because not a lot of people have the money really to get started on this. I mean, trees are expensive, and land is expensive, and equipment is expensive, and so the infrastructure to start this, it often requires a lot of money from a bank to get going. And if they're leery to loan, that's why we're not seeing a lot of this. So a holistic approach across all fields of environmental science is required to effectively implement agroforestry practices, and that includes the societal part, which includes educating banks and getting them to loan money for these purposes. It's best if we understand through two frameworks for understanding the social implications and dimensions of these practices to make them work. So there's, a lot of different forces that come together and resources that come together in the form of meso and micro capital that are required to, make this become a normal part of society. So COPET is based on human ecology and utilizes the vehicles of social evolution and locomotion. So it stands for culture, organization, population, environment, and technology. So our resources essentially are various forms of capital. We have human capital, we have social capital, we have environmental capital, we have financial and manufactured capital. So we need to integrate COPET and capital to create forces and resources and to make agroforestry a more commonly accepted practice. So the future of agroforestry in the United States. First, we have to address two major issues. All right, so we have to address the persistence and high cost of natural resources and environmental degradation due to industrialized agriculture, and we need to address changes in demographics and attitudes towards traditional agriculture practices to be more open and encompassing of some of these newer practices we've talked about in these PowerPoint slides, which technically they're not newer practices, but they're considered new because they're not what we have traditionally done. So if further developed, these new practices could provide infield management strategies, field and stream buffers, integrated silvopastoral systems, multi-use plantings and specialty products, agriculture community interface, integrated conservation and production systems in watersheds and landscapes, and community-based management of watershed systems. So lots of benefits could come from the development of these practices and the provisions that they give us. Here's a long list of amazing resources that students who put together this PowerPoint utilized. Again, I want to thank them for their hard work on this presentation and for allowing me to use it for future classes.